Hello and welcome back to Inside the Process, where we go behind the curtain a little bit and I share experiences or thoughts or, dare I say, opinions. I don't like that word, about making music, or at least where it has landed for me. And hopefully, whether or not you are a musician, you can connect to this. I'm back here at my piano. Last week, if you watched, I had a fun interview with my good friend Beth McDonald, and there will be actually, it's more fair to call that a conversation, because I did a lot of talking, but we were sharing and comparing our processes, and more of those conversations will be coming. But today, a topic that's been on my list for a long time, relative, for pretty much the whole time I've done this series. I just haven't found the way that I wanted to do it yet, but I think I may have it. And you'll see the topic, Neostring Piano. Now, I have never heard that term, but it's a term I use to, I guess, describe the idea that stride piano, as it was mechanically and historically done, it is kind of an essence that some players have jumped off of while still being connected to that. And I think that describes me, and I think that would also describe Dave McKenna, who would be the pianist who I am most, I guess, connected to stylistically, ultimately. And it was interesting how that developed. It wasn't because I studied him or anything like that. And he didn't consider himself a full-out stride player either, although he could do it, at least in spurts. And maybe sometimes I can do it in spurts as well. So stride piano is what grew out of ragtime in terms of the feel, the stylistic approach, a two-beat back and forth. The left hand is striding. And of course, it quickly became this element of virtuosity that people exploited and showed off how fast they could play and all of that. But coming out of ragtime was never intended to be like fast and show off. And stride kind of became that, but doesn't need to be that either. But when I came into playing music, I came in the stride piano era as far as my awareness, but at the very tail end. So I would hesitate to call myself a stride pianist because I have not absorbed, and nor do I perform, especially authentically, the music of like James P. Johnson and Willie the Lion Smith, who were two of the early stride. I guess James P. Johnson is the big name. I've been tinkering around with Carolina Shout for a long time, and I may actually start including it in my performances, but not until I figure out how to do it. Not quite the way he did, because I'm just not that clean. But a little bit of it that I can remember, kind of the way he did it, is like this. Rather than stop the recording and start over, because I would have liked to play that cleaner, I'm going to say it's probably as clean as I can kind of expect, hopefully a little better. But that represents, and of course I'm more accurate if I actually sit properly positioned to the piano. So that style, that virtuosity, just kept evolving into all of the different piano styles that happen today in jazz, and I would say otherwise, particularly solo piano styles. And I guess that's something I should emphasize that I didn't write down, that we are talking about a solo piano approach. And I've heard it, read and stated academically that stride piano is the only truly self-accompanying approach to playing jazz. You could argue that, but the point it's making is well taken. That everything is just out there in terms of all of the elements of the music in stride piano. Your left hand is being the bass player, your left hand's being the chord player, your right hand's playing. Of course, that's limiting to a certain stripe of music of that era. You can't just take, I don't know. Wind Beneath My Wings and play this. I mean, you could, but it doesn't fit everything. Actually, one cool thing that was pointed out to me that I hadn't paid attention to, Scott Bradley, Postmodern Jukebox, that's his stride version of Hey Jude. That's kind of cool, and you'll probably hear that come out of me sometime. I'm always looking for ideas like that, but that's a stylistically specific thing. So I mentioned ragtime. So those of you who heard me talk before, I apologize first, and then after that, you know that my exposure to jazz music as a teenager came concurrent or slightly after I was exposed to ragtime music in my piano lessons. And that actually became the jumping off point and my reference point for the early jazz styles, particularly when Joe Mediri plied me or pummeled me or something with all those Benny Goodman Trio recordings when I was like 14 years old and just got me in that head. So a little bit of ragtime, and I'll play on it. I won't play all the sections, but you've heard me do this before. Stop there. And that was actually probably too fast to play ragtime or Maple Leaf Rag for Scott Joplin standards, perhaps a little bit. But of course, you've heard people. All that stuff, which was not the intention of ragtime music. And if you heard me play Maple Leaf Rag, I actually use it as a shtick piece. And I just, I didn't want to do that this time, although I did a little bit, because the emphasis is on the left hand. And I didn't play it exactly as written, but it was close. Okay, and the left hand is striding back and forth. And there is a formula that you can apply to that, which when I'm improvising it, I get off of pretty quickly because it is kind of repetitive and monotonous, which is, a particular strong bass note chord, a slightly weaker bass note chord, root chord, fifth chord. And I want to hear like other melodic opportunities. Not the best example, but you kind of get it. So in ragtime music, you have often, typically, octaves in the left hand. And off you go. So that was what was in my head when I started listening to all the Goodman things. And I actually superimposed that a little bit too much on that music. And Teddy Wilson was the first pianist that I listened to, and I didn't entirely get the essence of that at the time. But I was kind of making decisions, and as I prepared this, I could kind of reconnect with decisions that I made going along the way. And one decision I made rather quickly was to dump the octaves down here. Because I was getting the idea, although it wasn't formed, that this is my bass line. Meaning all those lower notes. Whether it's a tuba playing it or an upright bass playing it. Other instruments that could play bass lines or electric bass guitar or a bass saxophone in very traditional jazz sometime. So applying that procedure to tunes that I learned at the time. Yeah. Let me see. Let me stop. I'm going to start over. I'm actually fighting myself in my head because I'm limiting my left hand. I'm not going to entirely succeed, but I'm limiting it to single note bass lines, which would be like ragtime, you know. But not as heavy, and I felt at the time and do now more stylistically appropriate for a tune like that. So anyway, let me see if I can play at least one pass through and keep my left hand that way. Stop there because the dam was breaking. But it's a bit of a different feel than ragtime, but not entirely, you know, and that's the stride thing. So what I was doing as a teenager was not reading sheet music transcriptions, which I think people who come into stride today, the heavy old school, old-fashioned style stride players, do read those transcriptions and then maybe jump off of them. Back in the day, you would use piano rolls for that, or could, and I'm sure some people still do, but they're, you know, I know one person who has a player piano and has a giant stack collection of piano rolls, but it's not in everybody's home at this point. And what you do is you'd run the piano roll, and then you would run it slowly, and then you would train yourself to just match whatever was happening there, right? Which is a way around reading music while still kind of sort of reading music-ish, or reading the piano. But all I had were records. And the longer I listened to the records, the more I heard. And I remember early on in the process listening to players like Teddy Wilson, but even more so Fats Waller, who was the second pianist I was introduced to, and a legitimate stride player, but the, I guess, evolved version of stride. He was really the last guy to do it as a cutting edge thing. I equate Fats Waller to Johann Sebastian Bach, where where he took everything around him that was being done and pretty much did it so perfectly that whatever came next had to be different. And that was the case with Bach, who ended the Baroque era of composing, which in fact that era of music is dated by the lifespan of Bach. And when Bach died, Baroque music was over because he had elevated it so high and other things were happening at the time. And that's what happens with music or anything. It evolves if you allow it. So as I'm listening to the recordings, I begin to hear that when he's playing, whoever he is, those bass notes. There's not just one note, right? The pianist is playing the interval of a tenth. So let's say, let me take a different key. He sees my bass note. I'm grabbing an E, an octave and two notes above. I'm going to get too far ahead of myself. Now, not all hands of pianists can actually reach a tenth. And mine barely does. I don't know how well you can see because the camera's not overhead. But I am stretched out as far as I can be. My little finger does get over the top of one, but my thumb actually has to come around the edge to catch it. And all of those Stride guys, whose names that you would know if you know Stride guys, all had bigger hands than I do. Not that my hands are tiny, but they're not large, you know. And so what I did in high school, and I can remember doing this in Algebra 3 class, in part because I was so lost in Algebra 3. But why did I take Algebra 3? I don't know. So I would take my hand on the desk and I would stretch it like this. And I'm sure you can see it. And the objective was to be able to make a straight line here without cupping my wrists, at least not dramatically. And I'm also double jointed, which helps. But the double jointed thing really doesn't play into this stretch. Okay? And then after a while, I got it where I could even reach the pesky ones with a black key on either side, extending the distance a little more. Barely. Now, some guys have to roll it all the time. I can make it. Now I can't do that in my right hand. Curiously, I can stretch. Now, of course, I've got these. And I've talked about this. This is. I don't have to have this to play for a few minutes, but if I'm playing extensively, it's very helpful. But ignore the wrist wrapping. You can see I don't have the same ability to stretch, and this cups more. It's actually not horrible, but you can see that this one just naturally does more. So I've overcome the handicap of the smaller hand, sorta, but I think it's fair to say I'm still at a bit of a disadvantage a little bit, but you overcome those things through other means. And then as I'm listening even more, I'm realizing, wait a minute, there's another note in there. The bass notes, especially like Fats Waller, often have a third note in the middle. So you have like, you have 10th, and you have something in the middle, 7th or 5th, maybe something funky like that. A musician I used to work with and know would describe stride piano as industrial strength ragtime. Not really, but I get what he's saying. But it is. So let me play like a chorus of Moonglow again. So I guess it could be argued or understood or speculated that the idea of the tenths were playing off the octave in what this musician would refer to as industrial strength. But how I took it was playing the bass note and then having nothing to do with changing the idea of the octave, but harmonizing the bass note and harmonizing the bass note again, all part of the bass notes. Because the octave in the ragtime music or whatever, it's just a heavier sound. It's not harmonized. It's not fuller or even thicker. Well, it's just, a little more sledgehammerish. The octave. And sometimes you want a sledgehammer, but typically not. So for me, the idea of the tenths and the extra notes is more for melodic movement, which now becomes like the things that I've personalized myself on this, but other people do. And then what you also noticed was that I was actually kind of moving around. There's a phrase for that, walking tenths, like you've heard of a walking bass line. With a little exception there, interval-wise, to create a leading tone movement. Too much description. I took a little liberty with one of the intervals, but the whole point now, for me, becomes melodic movement. And not a strict formula anymore, right? And you can have all of that, to me, delicious melodic leading tone goodness all down here, and then you have a melody happening in the right hand independent of that. And that's where I have fun. And that's also separated from the earlier stride piano, James P. Johnson, which is really all about, and I don't know if James P. I haven't really studied too much, did a lot of tenths. I'm sure he did, but even if so, the emphasis on melodic movement wasn't the same. And it's kind of more of a, I won't say contemporary emphasis, but it's an important part of the idea of jazz in general, that the sounds that you're playing are linear in structure, they connect, you know. So, with the idea of the walking tent, and I'm actually all mixed up in my notes here. So I think I'm going to skip one of the tunes I was going to do, and just go right to a fun little tune to walk. In fact, it's one that I did a couple weeks ago for piano for my friends and posted, which was exactly like you. I just got really silly with it. But it's a good tune to illustrate walking tents and stuff, particularly if I just keep it in C, which I usually don't. I wind up in C, I start in B flat, but let's just stay in C. And I'm going to do all sorts of things, single notes, walking tents. There you go. And I even caught myself doing some octaves there. There's a place for everything, even a place sometimes for sledgehammers. You know, you want to the trick is just not the trick. The objective is not to be limited in scope to any one thing, but have the ability to do all kinds of different things to express things. Okay, this is a big detour. And I don't know if I ever talked about, I'm going to make a note for myself right here. I'm writing, how many letters? 6 letters. Legato, Legato. I have to look back. I don't think I've done this, and it's a super important topic. And as I often do, I take a tangent, and then as soon as I start in the tangent, I don't remember what road I left to do the tangent. So why was I going to talk about legato? I know there's a reason, but suffice to say, this might not be it, but suffice to say that for me, having things melodically connected and lyrical is an important thing. So serves me right for going off my script. So let me read the next thing I wrote, which is, what I didn't understand about the essence of Teddy Wilson was, and this is the big thing that in the last 20 years has evolved within me, that feel is more important than approach. And so you have all these approaches that players use to promote the feel of stride, but not the mechanically necessarily correct. If you were being judged by a jury of stride pianists with sheet music in front of them, checking every note you were playing, which I used to do to myself, and I couldn't really pull it off, and I kept trying to do it, and it always affected the feel. And it finally sunk into me later in life that who cares what it is you're doing, it's what it feels like. And I guess that's the magic to me of Dave McKenna. And even more so than Teddy Wilson. Teddy Wilson, I never actually read transcriptions of Teddy Wilson. He was just sparse. He was willing to be really sparse in his left hand with sort of a stride essence. And I wanted to bang out the time, or feel the time, not bang it out. And then, you've heard me tell this story, however old I am, 19 years old or something, and I have the Merv Griffin show on an afternoon at home. And, I miss those days when all of those daytime and nighttime talk shows were hosted by, old school entertainers who would have all their old school friends, And Merv Griffin was not Merv Griffin, yeah. Who's the other guy now? Oh, Mike Douglas, yeah. That was the Philly guy. But Merv Griffin was a big band singer. And he had all jazz guys all the time on his show. I never heard of Dave McKenna. And here he is playing Sweet Georgia Brown. And right away, his left hand is the bass player. And the funny thing, I never actually, I guess I played around with it a little bit, but I never, because I didn't see anybody do it, I guess, it never dawned on me as that's a legit thing. And when I saw him do it, that was one of the small number of large epiphanies. And that seemed live. I just had the same on Merv Griffin. Playing Sweet Georgia Brown, and I guess it gave me permission. It made that idea legit. So hopefully I'm going to remember what I was going to say next, and I'll play a little Sweet Georgia Brown in the approach that Dave McKenna did, and I'll just jump right into it. was not representative of Dave McKenna is that he would have actually done some varied things at different points. He's kind of, I would say, patented unofficially to him, strumming kind of technique he did, which is really to my larger point. But specifically now, just having that left hand be the bass player, it just gave me this like focus, like, ooh. And the reason it was like easy to go there is because unlike anybody who comes up in jazz piano education today, and I mean anybody, I was in this old school fill up the space thing. And so it's just really rearranging that space, but still filling it up. You know, jazz today is about playing with rhythm section and voicings and stuff. Very few solo players who aren't coming out of the old traditions to begin with do the stride thing, but some do. Most notably in terms of young people, Emmett Cohen. Ooh, you know, he can do the stride thing, but lots of guys do. But he's a contemporary player, or much more so than a lot of the dedicated stride guys who can nail the stride. Right? But so what that did was that allowed me to explore doing that myself, but also just open the door or window, or took the roof off the barn and let everything in from the top. Just finding the creative ways to fill up that space. Now it doesn't have to swing anymore, you know? Okay, that was pretty dysfunctional thing, but you kind of get the idea. And I'm standing at a fork in the road, and I'm trying to take both of them at the same time, and the only thing that does is split your pants eventually. So let me, I don't even know where I want to go. Okay, let's go ahead and do a different stylisticated thing. You know what? No, I'm going to play Sweet Georgia Brown some more. The idea being now that I'm trying to take a lot of those things that I talked about, including a couple of sledgehammer octaves, and put them all in that long chorus. So to me, stride piano is not about the formulaic boom pop, which is what it is to some players. It's opening the door to take the bass line, the essence of the rhythm, the guitar, the whole rhythm section, and stick it either in your left hand or in some combination of your two hands, still having melodic ability up here, and then ideally have more melodic movement in all of this. And that doesn't have a name, you know, that's why I call it Neostring Piano. And that's, again, what Dave McKenna does. Not exactly the same way I do it, but I mean, he was, I'm not even going to call him the trailblazer, because I haven't seen anybody really follow him. He's so unique. And I say this super hesitantly. The person that I'm aware of who kind of most captures the Dave McKenna essence and approach even if, you know, this person isn't great like Dave McKenna, is me. I don't like using the word me like that, but I look at it more as just like the fluke of, you know, two people having similar brain wiring, uh, and that's why Dave McKenna comes up often uh, when people observe me or if I'm speaking about music. But the funny thing is that I didn't. After that first exposure to Dave McKenna, it wasn't like, man, I got to get more of Dave McKenna. It was, wow, what a great idea. That's so cool. And I just ran with that concept. Where I think other players in like jazz education will say, oh, you got something that really interests you or you're connected to? Okay, buy the records and start transcribing it all. And that would be like the typical jazz approach. And I was not taking a typical jazz approach. And so I was just constructing it on my own and paid minimal attention, for better or worse, to Dave McKenna for about 20 years later. Then when I listened to him, I had evolved that approach into something pretty similar to what he was doing. And it's like, whoa. To the point where I got really frustrated in 2008 when he passed away. And by that time, I was really starting to really dig in. And unfortunately, when he passed away, before that, there was very little on YouTube of Dave McKenna. But then people really stepped up and started posting all sorts of things. And now there's all official Dave McKenna stuff, and there's a documentary on Dave McKenna that's in the works. If you go to the Dave McKenna website, you'll see that. But nobody, when it came time to pay tribute to Dave McKenna, I'm watching all these, you know, somebody at Berkeley and somebody else, because New England was his, you know, stomping grounds primarily. They're all paying tribute to him, but nobody's like stylistically actually doing what he does in those tributes. And that's what made me release a CD. And I wish I, you know, had waited to record in some respects or did a little more studying first, but I called it In the Spirit of Dave McKenna. I thought about like redoing it because it's been a number of years now, whatever year that thing I did that. But it still captures the idea that self-accompanied solo piano, rhythmically engaged thing. You know, there are other guys doing it who aren't just doing all oompa stride stuff. All right. So having said all that, let me take another tune. I'll play Night and Day, and rather than do a walking bass line, I'm going to do a Latin feel, somewhere between a bossa and a samba. You know, if I were a real bass player, I would learn these things. But it's just all feel, and then fill in the gaps here. And Dave McKenna did other stylistic things too than swing, but to me that they weren't his strong suit. I don't think he lived there a lot. And of course, I've lived in the swing thing much more than any place else. But it might be fair to say that I've spent a little more time kind of cultivating in my head what to do in those stylistical aided things. So anyway, here we go. many detours. So as I'm going on, I'm thinking, well, let's just introduce other stylistic things. I went and put a little walking swing in there and change it up. But one thing I meant to do earlier and forgot, and I usually do it in Sweet Georgia Brown, and I sort of did but didn't, is do a bass solo, which is not the best attempt in that tune. But at one point along the way, playing tons of solo gigs, it's like, if I'm playing bass lines, I want the bass player to be able to solo, right? And let's go back to exactly like you. And it comes time for the bass solo. And what I would do, and I've done it with my hand I challenge myself. No. Bass player's on this side, right? So I started playing bass solos on solo gigs really sloppily and badly, right? Until I got to the point where my left hand... something like that, until it got rather fluent. Because hey, if I'm, if all the gremlins aside of me are playing all the instruments, let's do it up. Let's do it right. So Neostring Piano would be my term for taking the essence of stride piano and keeping that entirely self-accompanied thing, but not the rigid stylistic confines of stride piano. And in part because I just can't really do them. I can't play Carolina Shout cleaning up the tempo. I can't do a handful of keys. With all those tense and everything, up the tempo the way Fats Waller did it. So part of it is self-defense, but the other part of it, more than self-defense, is just finding the place where you feel it. And Dave McKenna was considered the hardest swinging solo jazz pianist, period. And that's because, his style and his approach all came from what he was feeling. None of it came from an agenda of an applied sort of template. And it took me a long time, and I'm still not completely divorced from feeling like I need to apply the template. Now I do something up tempo. I try, I stick like half a chorus or something like that in, and generally kind of like just write graffiti on all over what I did, because I'm trying to make this statement that I can do that. Well, what I can do if I get out of the way is feel something and then portray it if I get out of the way. And I guess that's the thing, I never thought of it this way about Dave McKenna. He got out of his way and he let it come out, and he could explain it. People would wonder, how do you do that? Well, explain it. And he, from what I read, he never really could. And it was taken that he didn't want to be bothered. But then I think some people began to understand. I would understand it completely. It's like, you can't really formulaically, systematically teach something that you didn't formulaically, systematically learn yourself. I mean, you can if you go back and deconstruct it and everything, but that's for him to say how you do it, hey, I do this. So anyway, I hope that was interesting or helpful. And I was going to play one Fast Wilder tune, but let me play another, and that's what we'll go out with. Come on. Its energy is still dissipating. Ha! All right. So, hope you found that engaging. If I remembered to put the support link to my website and you haven't visited that, I would appreciate that. But thank you in any case for being here. Thank you for those of you who provide support on this YouTube channel, Joe Holt 2021. Until it's no longer 2021, you'll see this on Wednesday nights premiering at 7 p.m. And then Thursday nights, Piano for My Friends on my Joe Holt's Notes main original pub YouTube channel. Thanks so much. Hope to see you soon.